so that I think probably to minimize bandwidth for everybody as well as for the recording, that everybody's camera and microphones are turned off. The most important thing, I guess, is that you can hear me. The setup, so that I think probably to minimize bandwidth for everybody as well as for the record. So, sorry, I just got some feedback there. So yeah, so we'll carry on trying to get this going here. In the meantime, just stand by for a moment. We still have some people waiting to come in anyways, so not everybody has arrived yet. Having any success, Nicole?
No, what I'll do,
Okay.
I'll request that everybody stick to the chat room for now. If you do have a question for Joe, what I'll do is I can unmute the participants one by one. So I'll get started with the intro, and I'll keep my eye on the chat function. So if you do have a question, just let me know, and then I'll allow to talk is the feature. So let's get started. It is 10:03. Good morning. Welcome to the Health and Safety Certificate Series. Thank you for joining us. My name is Nicole LeBlanc. I'm the Program Coordinator with the Tourism Industry Association of Nova Scotia, TIANS, and I'll be introducing our new and exciting webinar series and our presenter, co-host with Safety Services Nova Scotia, Joe Treen. Today's webinar is called Fundamentals of Leadership, Employer Responsibilities under the OHS Act. It's part of 4 of the program, and it's hosted by the Nova Scotia Tourism Human Resource Council. This session is going to cover your workplace obligations as an employer in a COVID-19 world and how to maneuver legal challenges while following protocols for your employees and customers. I'll post a web link in the messenger section on your right for those interested in the upcoming webinars in the series, which there's 3 more remaining. About becoming certified. So if you do complete the 4, you will be certified. So we'll learn more about that later on. And today I welcome Joe Treen, who will be our presenter for all 4 webinars, including the current. Joe is the Occupational Health and Safety Director at Safety Services Nova Scotia. He's a consultant and instructor and has worked in the safety and risk management field professionally for 22 years. And has supplied risk management and loss prevention services across Atlantic Canada. Before I pass the mic over to Joe, I will encourage guests to post their questions in the chat room, and answers to your questions, and also the webinar recording will be sent to everybody in a follow-up email. And now for the webinar you all came to hear, Fundamentals of Leadership. And off to Joe.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everybody's having a good morning. It's a Wednesday morning, hump day morning, and we'll carry on with this. So I did want to talk to you. I'm going to share a screen with you now. Bear with me. And you should all now see a PowerPoint screen. Hopefully that's all working properly and you can see this. So we're going to talk a little bit about employer responsibility specifically today with regards to workplace health and safety. It's again, my name Joe Treen. I work with Safety Services Nova Scotia. I've been here for 13 years now, and prior I worked with another organization across Atlantic Canada doing health and safety and workplace safety and loss prevention. So I've worked with a lot of different industries across the provinces over the years, so I have a little sampling of some of the things that you may have to deal with along the way. Before I start, I just want to touch briefly on what Safety Services Nova Scotia is, because we are a little different than the average provider. We are actually a private nonprofit organization, so we don't have an owner. We're operated by a board of directors. We've been around since 1958, so a long, long time. Our operation is divided into three primary sectors. My side of thing is on the workplace side. We work with a wide variety of employers to help them with training needs. We do a lot of consulting work to help them set programs up and things like that. This has been particularly true through the COVID times, trying to help organizations with their reopening plans and getting things back on the road for that. We do a lot of audit work as well and gap assessment work, so helping clients understand where they may have opportunities to improve their present programs, as well as we are an authorized provider of WCB safety certified program. But on the other side of the fence, we have a road safety division that we have a driver's ed class, so we teach young drivers to drive here in Halifax. We actually train driving school instructors for other providers. We do a lot of corporate driver improvements, so defensive driving, safe backing, load securements, all those type of things for corporate driver improvement as well, both in classroom and in an online format. And our other big program that a lot of people know us for is our motorcycle program. So all summer long, when you're driving around and you saw a whole bunch of motorcycles, like a little parade of Shriners going around and around circles in a parking lot, that was us. We do that from one end of the province to the other, from Sydney to Yarmouth, and provide motorcycle training and licensing for anybody wishing to learn how to ride a motorcycle and get their driver's license to drive the motorcycle on the road. We've been doing that for a very long time. It's a large program and it's all across the province. Then we also have a community safety wing. So the big project in community safety for this time of year is our school bus safety campaign. So you'll be seeing information coming out on social media. There's often roadside checks that the RCMP set up, and to give people information, remind them that the school buses are back out in the road, folks. Do pay attention. That giant yellow box with the big flashing lights is really important, and please don't pass them, even though it seems to still be a common issue out there. So a little bit about us as an organization, because we are a little bit different than the average for-profit company in that way. So I want to I'll start in with something that is kind of near and dear to my heart, and what's referred to as the IRS, or the Internal Responsibility System. Internal Responsibility System is the foundations of all occupational health and safety legislation across our country. From no matter what jurisdiction you're in, it's all based around this principle of internal responsibility system. And basically what that means is that it's our job as organizations to look after ourselves. So we're responsible to look after, I'm responsible to look after me, I'm responsible to look after the people I work with, and I'm responsible to look after anybody that's coming into my workplace from outside, essentially. It's a shared responsibility. We all have the same responsibility. So everybody is in this together. It's not solely the government's job to keep us safe. It's not solely the employer's job to keep us safe. We all share in this responsibility, and that's the important part. And I truly believe that if we could truly get this to work, we could significantly reduce or eliminate injuries and fatalities in our workplaces for sure. If we all looked out and we all honestly stepped in and intervened when something was going wrong, the chances of something happening go down significantly. The whole principle around this is that all of the legislation is designed around this principle. So we'll talk about the specific responsibilities of the workplace parties as we go along, but keep this in mind, that this idea is that it's a shared responsibility amongst all the parties in the workplace. Government, and in the case of occupational health and safety, the regulator, the police for occupational health and safety, is the Department of Labor OHS division. The OHS division has a number of officers. I think the complement is somewhere around roughly 40 officers across the province that Their job is to make sure that we comply with the laws and that we're meeting the requirements of the internal responsibility system. They'll actually even call it an IRS checklist or an IRS inspection when they come in to visit your workplace. Bear in mind, government is external to the internal responsibility system. And this is one of the things I can tell you as a safety person working in this industry for a long time. And unfortunately, seeing some of the really bad side of safety where somebody has been killed or seriously injured, where they can no longer work and it's affected their life significantly. It's a terrible thing to have to live through. But oftentimes when we have that experience, and you'll see those things published in the newspaper, the media gets a hold of it, and you'll see it in the paper, you'll see it on the radio stations, you'll see it on the TV talking about this. And inevitably, the first response comes out is, we need stiffer regulations. We need more penalties. We need to send employers to jail for these things. We need to, right? This is the knee-jerk reaction that occurs every time we have one of these serious incidents out there. That's not the internal responsibility system. My question is, how did this happen, and why did, what gaps were there that allowed this to happen? It's not the government's responsibility directly to keep us safe. It's our responsibility. We look after ourselves. We look after our people. Our people look after their friends and family, and so on. Adding more layers of bureaucracy and legislation and penalties has some effect, there's no question, but it doesn't change the culture. It doesn't change the overall. So you'll get so far with that kind of approach, but you hit a wall very quickly. And we see it all the time. When employers try to take a really hard line on things and they're punishing employees for every time they do something wrong, that only gets you so far. And you eventually kind of hit a glass ceiling and can't figure out why you can't seem to improve anymore. When really the key is to, again, involve people in the process and get them thinking about it and all working together collaboratively to make this work. That's by far the better solution and by far the most effective long-term solution. So here's a little diagram by a gentleman named Peter Strallendorf. If you see his name, if you can see the number of initials after his name, it's longer than his name. He's a lawyer and a safety professional and a professor and a psychologist and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He did this little diagram up, and I really like it because it kind of displays the internal responsibility system in a graphic format. So again, everybody's included in this. Everybody within our workplace is included as part of this internal responsibility system. And you can see that the responsibility might get delegated downward to people, but the accountability goes upward. So when something happens, an investigation is completed by the regulator, by the Department of Labor, and they're looking for what happened and why it happened, and how did the internal responsibility system break down? Where was the gap that happened? So this diagram just kind of gives you a little bit of a visual as to what the internal responsibility system is really looking for. It's looking for that shared accountability, that shared responsibilities of things, but eventually the accountability moves up the ladder as opposed to rolling down the ladder. It rolls up the ladder, and the expectation is that as presidents and VPs and directors, we're expected to have put the things in place to support those people underneath of us so that they can do the things that they need to do at the end of the day. Under the internal responsibility system, there are 3 fundamental rights, and you may have seen these. This is something I usually ask the question to people if they know what the 3 rights are. And very few, most will pick out the right to refuse. Yes, every worker, whether at any level in an organization, and that doesn't, that can be all the way from a VP down, all have the fundamental right to refuse unsafe work. That's not work that I don't like to do. That's not work that I find unpleasant. That's not work that that I think somebody else should be doing. No, I have the right to refuse unsafe work. If that work could bring immediate harm to me or to somebody around me, then I have the right to refuse to do that work. Now, what that means is I go to my supervisor, and the act is very clear with the process that has to be followed if I'm going to refuse to do a job. So I'm going to go to my direct supervisor and I'm going to explain the reason why I feel this is unsafe. Now, I can tell you from personal experience that in 90% of occasions, that's where it ends. Because you and I get together as the worker and supervisor, and you go, oh my God, I didn't realize that was a problem. Let's come up with a solution. Let's fix it, and we'll move on. And that's what happens 90% of the time. It's smooth as glass. That's the way it's supposed to happen. We're supposed to deal with our own problem, come up with solutions, work collaboratively to come up with solutions to fix it. So if that doesn't work, my next avenue as an employee that's refusing an unsafe situation is to escalate it to either my safety committee if I have one, or to my safety representative if I have one, who then kind of is my ombudsman, for lack of a better description, is my representative to go to management and explain the situation and try to come up with a resolution. If that still fails, my last line of defense is now to step outside of the internal responsibility system. But it's only after I have exhausted those avenues to try to resolve it within our internal responsibility system do I step outside and go to the Department of Labor. So one of the requirements under the Act for posting information is to have the phone number to the Department of Labor posted for everybody to be able to find. And this is one of the reasons, so they can call and ask questions and do things if they need to. They have access to the Department of Labor, the regulator, to do these things. But they need, in the case of a refusal or an issue, they need to follow the steps first of at least giving their supervisor the heads up and trying to find a collaborative approach from within before I go outside of that. And that's really important. People don't always understand that, and they circumvent that process all the time, which again, just degrades the internal responsibility system within our organization. If somebody's doing an end run around you, that doesn't build any trust, that doesn't build any sense of collaboration whatsoever. And all it does is make bad feelings and move things backward. The right to know is another important one. The right to know is, as an employee, at any level in the organization, I have the right to know the hazards that I'm potentially being exposed to and how I manage those to keep myself and those around me safe. So I always use the simple example, and some may remember the old days when you might have been, as a teenager in high school or something, a summer job. You might have been worked at a fast food place or something. You were given chemical X to go clean something with. And you said, well, what is that? And the answer is, you don't really need to know that. Just be really careful using it, because just be careful using it. It's really strong. That's not acceptable, right? We need to know what we're dealing with and how to protect ourselves. If this chemical is something that has strong fumes, then I need to know that. And I need to know, do I need to wear some sort of respirator to protect myself? Do I need to wear gloves to protect my hands from this stuff? Is it flammable? Do I need to be aware of possible ignition sources when I'm using this product? These are the kind of things that all fall under the right to know. We have the right to know these things, and that's really important. And I encourage you, particularly if you have kids that are starting out in the workplace, they are to ask the question. Just encourage them to ask the question. If they're not sure, don't be afraid of looking stupid. Ask the question. It's only a dumb question that you don't ask. Always better to ask and be sure than not ask and confirm the sure. So the right to participate is the third one. And the right to participate means basically that we have the right to, again, all employees within an organization have the right to participate in, if a Department of Labor officer is coming in doing an inspection, I have the right to go and ask them the questions and point out things that I want their opinion on. If we're doing an inspection internally, I have the right to talk to the person doing the inspection, ask questions about certain things. Could you find out about this? Could you find out about that? I have the right to participate, the right to volunteer to be on the health and safety committee if you have one, or to be the safety representative. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference between those later on. But I have the right to participate in the system. So in identifying hazards, in reporting incidents, in providing constructive feedback, in helping improve the program, the system, to make it safer and better for everybody within the organization. That's my right to participate. But here's Joe's motto with regards to that. I don't know, I find the terminology rights leads people to very much dig their heels in, draw a line in the sand and say, it's my right and nobody's going to take that right away from me. When it comes to health and safety, I encourage people to think of those three rights: right to refuse, right to know, right to participate, also as responsibilities. So as an employee, I have the responsibility to refuse unsafe work. If somebody's giving me a job that I don't feel is safe or I don't feel safe doing, I have a moral responsibility to say, I don't think this is safe. I'm concerned about this. I think we should find a better way to do this, or I need somebody with more experience to help me with this, or so on and so forth. If I don't know what the hazards are associated with what I'm about to do, I need to ask. I have the responsibilities to ask that question and understand what I'm doing before I jump in with both feet. And the same thing with participate. I have a responsibility to participate and raise concerns, identify things that are wrong, report injuries or incidents that occur. I have an obligation to do that, because if I don't do that, our system breaks down. How can you fix something if you don't know it's broken? So I always tell people, like, I can't fix what I don't know is broken. So if you don't come to me and tell me it's broken, I can't fix that. So it's a shared responsibility. It's a two-way street. It really is. It's very important, and that's what's key to the internal responsibility system, is that two-way street, and that everybody working together towards the same common goal to making this thing work. So I mentioned in Nova Scotia, most of us fall under the Occupational Health and Safety Act of Nova Scotia. The Occupational Health and Safety Act is the overbridging act or law that oversees workplace or occupational health and safety in the province of Nova Scotia. There is a second set of rules for federally regulated workplaces. So people may, if you're in the HR field, you may be familiar with the Canada Labor Code, Part 1 and Part 3. Well, Part 2 is occupational health and safety, but Part 2 of the Canada Labor Code only applies to specifically federally regulated industries. So interprovincial trucking, interprovincial ferry services, telecommunications, things like that, that provincial boundaries really don't have any meaning. They cross provincial boundaries as part of their normal business. Most of us all fall under the Nova Scotia regulations. So back many years ago, when they were handing out the responsibilities to the various levels of government, from federal to provincial to municipal, they chose to put occupational health and safety in the provincial pot and hand that down to the provinces to manage, to look after. So the Occupational Health and Safety Act of Nova Scotia is our primary law that covers occupational health and safety. It's a fairly high level law, so it talks in generalities and high level. There are then specific regulations that fall under the Act. So specific regulations are more detailed and prescriptive as to what they want us to do. So an example would be, there's a first aid regulation. The first aid regulation tells us very clearly what training we need for how many people, how often they have to refresh that training, how many Band-Aids have to be in our first aid kits. These are all covered specifically under the first aid regulations. Same thing for working at heights, same thing for working with chemicals. there's all specific regulations that are applied to those particular things. The thing I want everybody to remember, though, is that all of these laws and regulations are the bare minimum. This is not the goal to which we strive to achieve. This is the lowest point that you can achieve. Anything below that, and you've broken the law. And this is commonly misunderstood. And because I get a lot. What do I have to do to meet? I just want to meet legal compliance, and that's fine to get started. That's what you want to get. You want to get to at least the minimum level first, but your goal is to be beyond that that minimum level. So bear in mind, the Act and the regulations are bare minimum level for everything. Here is kind of a paraphrased version of, remember I said the Act breaks out the responsibilities of the parties within the workplace as part of the internal responsibility system. Here is kind of a paraphrased summary of what falls under the requirements or the responsibilities for an employer. The duties and precautions, as they refer to it in the Act, is how it's termed. To provide a safe workplace, to ensure training and how to do the work safely. Sound like right to know? That's right to know right there. Ensure that equipment is safe and all guards are in place. So when we buy the new table saw, the carpenter buys the new table saw, although at home, he or she the first thing they may do is take the guard off it and throw it back in the corner and get rid of it because it's in the way. In the workplace, we're not permitted to do that. Any of those guards that come on equipment must stay there by law. We're not allowed to remove them. Inform employees on what could harm them and safety measures take place. Again, right to know. Here it is again. That's drawing that out, trying to make that clear. Offer clear direction on who employees talk to if something isn't safe. So again, when it comes to the refuse or the identifying hazards, make sure people understand who in the organization they can talk to. It's usually the supervisor, their direct supervisor or manager, but giving them clear direction so they know and encouraging them to do it. It's really important. And I can tell you, we do a lot of supervisor training specifically. And one of the things I harp on for supervisors is, for God's sakes, if you roll your eyes once, you will never see another bit of information come from anybody. You've got to try, even if it seems ridiculous and it seems over the top, you've got to bite your tongue and you've got to say, thank you very much for your input, and we really appreciate it. We'll see what we can come up with to come up with a solution for that, because it's very important that we keep those channels open and we don't put barriers in place to stop those. Based on the requirements, so this is where I said I was going to talk about the idea of a health and safety committee or a representative. So the Act breaks workplaces up into three large segments, I guess. So from 1 employee to 4 employees is considered one segment. For that, there's limited minimum requirements for that's a very small business, so 1 to 4 employees. Once you hit the 5 employee mark, from 5 to 19 employees, you're required to have a few other things. And one of the things is you need to assign, or you need to get a volunteer to be the health and safety representative, the safety representative. So they're basically a person, and it has to be an employee member. I should be clear about that. It has to be somebody that has no managerial or supervisory responsibilities. This is somebody who is an employee. And they're basically the conduit for other employees to feed information up to management. So if I have a concern and I'm nervous about taking it to my supervisor, I can take it to my safety rep, who will then go to management and say, this has been raised. He may not use my name or anything. He or she will be that conduit to bring that information up through. Once you hit 20 employees, so 20 or more employees, you're required by law to have an occupational health and safety committee. Now, the Act lays out what a safety committee is, but essentially it is that, essentially, if I was to paraphrase it, to narrow it down, I would say it's something that's there to be part of that cooperative decision-making process. So the committee is a group of employees and or managers that will discuss things with regards to health and safety. They don't have to be industry experts. They don't have to be safety professionals by any means. They're just a bunch of people who get to brainstorm ideas around to make sure that our internal responsibility system is working the way it should be. The committee can be any size you choose that's appropriate for the workplace. They don't tell you it has to be a specific size. They say it can be any size that the committee feels or that the employer feels is appropriate. The employer is responsible to establish the committee, and then the committee pretty much runs on its own. The requirement in Nova Scotia is slightly different than some of the other jurisdictions, is that at least 50% of the committee members must be non-management employees. Again, nobody with supervisory or management responsibilities. The reason for that is pretty clear. I think it's trying to get a representation from the worker, from the worker's perspective. They don't want that to be swayed in any way by management. So it's important to have at least 50% that are workers. You could theoretically, in Nova Scotia, you could theoretically have a committee that's all workers and no managers or no supervisors. I don't encourage that, because then there's nobody with any authority to do anything. There's nobody that has the knowledge of things that are coming up in the organization and things. It's not a very productive way to do it. Other jurisdictions require a 50-50 split very clearly. Half have to be managers and half have to be employees. Nova Scotia just says at least half have to be employees. So keep that in mind when you're establishing these things. You have to have at least 50% that are non-management employees. But the total number of the committee can be determined by the workplace. If you have a huge workplace with hundreds and hundreds of employees, then it probably makes sense to have, a few members on the committee. If you have a very small workplace with 25 employees, you might only have 3 or 4 members on the safety committee. That's perfectly fine. I usually recommend to people to select your members based on the operations and the hazards associated with those operations. So if I have a small or moderate, medium-sized hotel complex, hotel facility, I might have a maintenance department. So I want to have somebody from maintenance, because they're the ones that climb around the roof, and they're the ones that climb on ladders and change light fixtures and do all that kind of stuff. If I have a kitchen, I'll probably want somebody from the kitchen, because again, things are different in the kitchen. There's more hazards and different hazards in the kitchen than there might be at the front desk. But I'll also want somebody from the front desk representing, because again, the front desk is different from other parts of the operation, and so on. Housekeeping, the same kind of idea. So it very much depends on your organization, but look at the different aspects of how your organization works, and that'll help guide you as to how many people and what people you want to have serving on this safety committee. The employer is also obligated to work collaboratively with the regulator, so with the Department of Labor. And I don't know if anybody has ever had a visit by the Department of Labor, but they will occasionally stop by on a random visit. They have the authority to do that. They can stop in anytime they want. That's a reasonable time of day or night. That the business is open. They can't make you come down and open up at 3 o'clock in the morning. But if you're open at 3 o'clock in the morning, they could very well show up and request to conduct an inspection. When they do that inspection, they usually request a management member to participate, and they usually request, if there's a safety committee or a safety representative, for that person to accompany as well, so that again, they can give information to all of those parties. And again, we're obligated to cooperate with them. So if they show up, we can't really say, sorry, today is not a good day, you'll have to come back next week. That generally doesn't fly very well. They have the authority to do it whenever they want. They're reasonable people in most cases. So, they'll be reasonable about it, but again, don't slough them off as being unimportant or anything, because they do carry a lot of clout, which we will talk about. There's also a requirement for a policy, health and safety policy and or health and safety program. Again, this is where that number applies. So at the 20 plus employer, or sorry, at the 0 to 4 employer, 1 to 4 and the 5 to 19, I'm required to have a health and safety policy. Now, a health and safety policy is generally a one-pager that basically says things. There's certain things that the Act says have to be included. So it has to include the employer's commitment to cooperate with the fellow employees towards health and safety in the workplace. It has to express the employer's commitment to cooperate with the representative or the safety committee towards ensuring that workplace safety in the workplace. It also has to express the responsibilities of the various parties within the workplace towards that goal. So you'll see they're generally one-pagers that, you know, there's lots of samples of things out there that you can see that look like this, but that's a requirement by law that we must have. Once we hit that magic 20 mark, I already said we have to have a safety committee, but we also then have to have a written health and safety program. So a written health and safety program has a whole bunch of things in it. So it has a facility to ensure training, to ensure we develop safe work procedures, to identify hazards, to investigate incidents that occur in the workplace, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole list of things that have to be included in that document. And it does have to be a written document that explains what you're going to do. And the reason being, with a larger group of employees, if there's only 3 of us, we can pretty much put our heads together and we pretty much, you know, we can better communicate. When you've got a larger group, it's good to have something on paper so somebody can go back to this document and see what our intent is. So that's the idea. We're also obligated to follow the Occupational Health and Safety Act and any regulations associated with it. So one of the ones that I did want to touch on, though, one of the duties and precautions of employers is the very first one in the Act, and it sort of falls paraphrased here as to provide a safe workplace, but the language is to ensure the health and safety of persons at or near the workplace. That's what they refer to as the general duty clause. And you'll sometimes see media reports or newspaper articles, things where company XYZ was charged under the general duty clause of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. That's what they're referring to. And if you think about those words, as an employer, I have a duty and precaution to ensure the health and safety of persons at or near the workplace. That's a pretty broad umbrella. That covers a lot of stuff. And that's the part that, again, we need to be aware of, that this covers a lot of stuff. And not always is that stuff specifically prescribed within the regulations. So this is a common one I get. I get a lot of calls and questions about this from a variety of different people, from safety committee members, from employers, and so on, asking me, well, I want to do, let's say X training, this particular type of training. I'm thinking about doing this training, or somebody's thought we should do this training. Can you show me where in the regulations it says I have to do this? Because, you know, my employer is saying, if it's not, you know, it's not in the regulations, I don't have to do it, right? Because that's the way laws work. If it's not there, you don't have to do it. But that's not the way it works in occupational health and safety, because that general duty clause still applies. So even if it's not specifically prescribed in a regulation that you shall do training on, let's say it's I don't know, handling a particular product, and there's nothing that says specifically that I have to have specific training to handle that particular product, but you know it's a particularly hazardous product, you know that it could cause real harm to somebody that didn't. We have an obligation under that general duty clause to make sure we do provide that kind of training, even though it's not specifically regulated. Does that, that's something, again, that people don't always understand. Just because it's not prescribed does not mean it's not reasonable for me to do. And think about it in hindsight. If something was to happen and you had to stand up in a court of law and explain to a judge that you did everything reasonable, and you said, well, Judge, it didn't say, there's nowhere that says I had to provide somebody training to use a meat saw in a butcher shop. And the judge would look at you and go, really? You're telling me you put a 16-year-old on a saw that could amputate body parts, and you didn't think it was appropriate to provide them some sort of training? You can see very quickly how that goes downhill very fast. So just because it doesn't say it's, just because it doesn't specifically say it, ask yourself that question. Would it be reasonable to have provided this person with some training or tools or equipment or knowledge or any of those things to help them stay safe at this particular task or this particular job? So just keeping that in mind, because it's really important. This is how we get in trouble all the time. And I see employers get big fines and penalties as a result of not thinking that they had to do something because it wasn't in the regulation. And we still have to do it. If it's reasonable, we have to do it. Speaking of penalties, I can tell you that there's several tiers of penalties built into the system to make sure that we do follow the rules, that we do what we're supposed to do. So the first one is back in 2014, they had launched the administrative penalty regulation, which gives an officer in the field the ability to essentially write speeding tickets or parking tickets to you right on site. So they can write a ticket, an administrative penalty, or an AP as they refer to them, the acronym, to anybody that they feel isn't following the rules. So that could be an employer. So they can write an administrative penalty to an employer for having a non-compliant ladder in the workplace. So there's certain ladders that you're not allowed to have. You have to have a certain grade ladder in the workplace. Again, that's within the regulations. And having a non-approved ladder in the workplace, is a violation of the regulation. Therefore, you could potentially get an administrative penalty for that. They can also write an administrative penalty directly to a supervisor or manager. So if the employer has rules in place that we only use certified ladders and the labels must be in place and they must be this, and the supervisor allows this ladder in that doesn't meet those requirements, he or she could be in line for a penalty. Or it can be written directly to an employee. And sometimes, you know what, that's the reality. Sometimes the reality is we've told Jimmy to follow the rules and we've given him the coaching and we've given him the training and we've given him the proper tools to do the job. And you know what, Jimmy just flat out refuses to follow the rules. In those cases, this is a tool that the officers in the field have to give Jimmy a little wake-up call. They don't like to use these, and they'll only use them in more extreme situations if there's a violation, particularly anything that's a high risk environment. So somebody could be seriously injured or killed. You'll see them write these kind of penalties. But that's kind of the first level. There's the chart with the various levels of these. So these are, financial penalties. And they escalate with the repeat offenses. So if they come back and find the same thing again, then the penalty escalates accordingly. So 500 to 2,000 for employers, 250 to 1,000 for supervisors or managers, and for employees up to 500, from 100 to $500. Now, again, I'm not a believer that the stick is the way you motivate people, but sometimes you need to have that there. There's also penalties directly under the Act itself. So the Act itself has penalties upwards to a maximum of $500,000 and or 2 years imprisonment. So they can throw you in jail, and they have thrown people in jail here in Nova Scotia. You might even remember there was a gentleman that was provided jail time just a few years back here in Halifax for not complying with the rules. Nobody actually got hurt, but he just refused to comply to the rules. The officers tried every mechanism to try to get him to apply. The courts gave him various opportunities. He simply refused, and the judge finally got fed up and threw him in jail. So there is a potential to be jailed as a result of a non-compliance with the regulations, and the fines are substantial. The officers themselves, I mentioned, I wanted to touch on that because the officers in the field, the OHS officers with the Department of Labor, are afforded certain powers under the Act, and they're pretty broad bridging. They actually arguably have a lot more power and clout than even an RCMP or police officer does, because they can come into a workplace in the event of an accident or even during an inspection, and they can require you to produce documentation. They can shut down workplace. They can put a stop work order on and shut down a portion of a workplace or an entire workplace. They can even get a court order to shut down all associated business within under that particular business name in the province if they feel that that same hazard is present in other locations in the province. So they carry a lot of clout. They don't need to have search warrants to go through files to seize documentation, to compel witness testimonies. They don't need subpoenas. They don't need search warrants. They can collect all of those things under the Act gives them the authority to do that. They can take pictures. They can come into they can come into your workplace any reasonable time, day or night. So they can require you to do certain things. They can require you to bring in third-party expertise on certain issues. They give them a fair amount of clout to work with. So, but again, the idea is that, you know, it's all around health and safety. It's around keeping people safe. So they give them a little bit extra thing. You won't see them. They don't use these things unless they need to. They're pretty reasonable in their application. And actually, I can honestly say that in the years I've been involved, it's changed a lot, and they're a lot more collaborative and helpful today than they have ever been in the history of the division. In fact, you know, like, don't be a bit afraid of seeing one of these folks and asking them to come and visit you, because they're actually quite helpful and collaborative in their approach today compared to what it used to be in the old days. At the end of the day, you know, like, again, I don't believe that penalties are the answer to anything, or punishments or the punitive measures are the answer to getting things done. At the end of the day, health and safety makes good business sense. An injury in your workplace not only costs you the downtime of that employee, it costs you the ill feelings and the poor reputation that comes out of that, which is, you know, that's a very broad-ranging number. It could be really large. Most of us pay WCB. So WCB is just an insurance company, Workers' Compensation Board. They're just an insurance company. They're no different than any other insurance company in the grand scheme of things when it comes to things. So the more claims you have, guess what? Your rates go up. The more accidents you have with your car, guess what? Your rates go up. Same principle. So every time you have an injury at work that they have to pay out a claim on, you can rest assured that you're going to pay more next year, and you're going to pay more the year after, and you're going to pay more the year after again. And these things add up really fast, because, as most of you know, you pay WCB based on your what you're paying out in salary. So it's a percentage of your payroll is what you're paying your WCB on, is on a percentage. So it's a huge cost on the WCB side, on the insurance premium side. It's a huge cost on the moral side of things. Whether you're an employer that people want to come work for or you're not. And I'm sure any of you that have children that are starting in the workplace, even in their first jobs in high school and stuff, you know, this is important. If Junior has to make a choice between going to company A or company B, and you know the company A has had all kinds of people hurt on their jobs, and they've been fined, and they've been charged by the Department of Labor and everything else, you know where you're going to ask Junior to go, right? Even if it is for 50 cents an hour less, or $1 an hour less, because you want them to go someplace that look after people, the people, and you know that they're going to come home safe and sound and healthy at the end of the day, because that's important to all of us. So those kind of things all play a big role in why we do occupational health and safety. It's not to follow the rules. It's not just to comply with the law. It's because we want all of our people. I want everybody that comes to work for me in the morning to go home as good or better than they left. So And I sincerely believe that. I don't want them broken. I don't want them going home broken. If anybody's ever had to live through an experience of having an employee seriously injured at work and having to make that phone call to their family, telling them that, dad's not coming home tonight, that's not a pleasant experience, and I wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy. It's a terrible thing. It's something you'll never forget. And the same thing goes for anybody who's had a colleague that they've worked with be seriously injured in a workplace injury. You feel the same way. You feel guilt. You feel like I could have done something to prevent that from happening. I encourage you. There's a poem that was written quite some time ago now, but it's called "I Could Have Made." I looked the other way. So if you Google "I Look the Other Way," you'll see this poem come up. And it's a poem written by a guy whose colleague that he worked with was killed. And he's deeply blaming himself because he could have done something to prevent that from happening. He could have stopped that from happening. And now he has to face seeing this colleague's spouse, once a week at the grocery store or whatever. And the guilt is just immense that he could have prevented something from happening, and he didn't, because he didn't want to offend somebody. He didn't want to be seen as a safety Nazi, or this kind of thing. And we deal with that all the time. So again, it's really important that we look at things from that perspective. And it's not always just the big things, it's the little things sometimes. Most of you have probably seen, this is a clip from one of the newer WCB Nova Scotia ad campaigns, or Atlantic campaigns. The workplace injuries hurt most at home. And I love those ads because it helps bring home that it's the little things sometimes that have the biggest effect and biggest impact. If anybody's had a back injury or something like that, you realize that it affects your life in so many ways. And it's often the workplace is the least part of it. It's when you go home and you can't play with the kids, or you can't play with the grandkids, or you can't do the things that you like to do, that you love to do, because of this injury. It's put you on your back foot, and you can no longer do the things that you love to do. And what an effect that has. We've seen it with COVID. We couldn't do the things that we used to love to do, to go see our family and spend time with the grandkids and do all of these things. Those were taken away from us by a disease, by a pandemic. The same things happen when somebody gets hurt at work. Those things can be taken away, and the impact it has is substantial and can cause a lot of harm to people. So just keep those things in mind. It's not always the big things. Most often, in case most of our workplaces, it's the little things that are going to have the biggest impact. A few resources I thought I'd leave you in closing. WCB does have this website that the top link is what they call their small business toolkit, safety toolkit. It's a really good website. They also have a PDF document you can download, or if you want, I've got hard copies of that. If you want a hard copy of one, feel free, let me know, and I'll be glad to send you out a hard copy, or WCB can send you out a hard copy. But it gives you, as a small employer, it gives you some tools to help build that safety program and to build that safety system to try to keep your employees safe. Because again, it's not something that comes natural to us. It's something we need a little bit of help with. So the second link is where you find on the Government Department of Labor's website, where you find all of the Act and all the regulations, as well as they have a bunch of supporting guides and documents on there as well that can help you along the way. So you can go in there and have a look at the regulations that are there, the Act. You should have a copy of the Act in the workplace anyways. That's a requirement to have a copy posted. So go on there and pull down the most recent version. They do change it periodically. The latest revision, if yours on the front cover doesn't say 2016, then it's not the latest version. So there's a newer version. So pull down the latest version, have a look through it, and think. And again, my number and contact information is there. If you ever have any questions, comments, concerns, you just want to bounce an idea around, do feel free to reach out. I'm glad to try to help out. It's one of the things, you know, as members, we tie-ins and safety services kind of trade memberships in this way. It's one of the benefits we can provide to our members is a little bit of consultative help periodically for small things that, you know, if it's a matter of a 10-minute phone call, I'm more than glad to help you out. And no, I'm not going to start the clock and send you a bill for it. Only if it's something more substantial am I going to do that. So I'm glad to try to help out, because I really, one of the things I love about doing the work I'm doing is trying to help companies, particularly smaller businesses, try to, you know, navigate these waters and get better and do the things that they need to do to make them better employers all the way across the board. Now, Nicole hasn't jumped in, so I don't know if there's any questions that have come up. I'm going to stop the share now and come back. So
We have one question, Joe.
okay.
Can OHS committee members be fined?
No, they cannot. Well, okay, let me back that up. Never in the history of all of Canada has an OHS committee ever been charged or fined under the Act. As long as they're working in good faith, then they're perfectly fine. Now, if for some reason our committee got a vendetta out and we particularly targeted somebody and we sent them intentionally into a harmful situation and they got injured, okay, maybe, but that would be a real reach. There's no intention under the Act to ever charge or hold accountable a safety committee, because the safety committees seem to be a collaboration of people to work towards a common, towards this ultimate common goal. They're not seen as a person of responsibility. In fact, the way the Act is even worded, when they talk about, I talked about the duties and precautions of employers and the duties and precautions of employees and the duties and precautions. When it comes to safety committees, it's the functions of a safety committee. They don't call them duties and precautions. No intention to hold them particularly accountable to those things. So no, you will not see committee members getting fined or held accountable. They're not seen in that light. Yeah. So somebody mentioned here, I see about invisible injuries around mental health. Again, that's a health and safety, because it's health and safety. It's not just safety. So while our regulatory system, we don't have a specific regulation yet that talks about mental health, bullying, harassment, any of those things. At this point, our present regulation is the workplace violence regulation, and it talks about physical harm or threat of physical harm. The reality is mental health, stress, bullying, harassment are all injuries, and they're all related to health, and therefore they can very well find themselves into the employer's duties and precautions to ensure the health and safety of persons at or near the workplace. So, you know, turning a blind eye to that, again, to me, is not a wise thing. Even though it's not specifically prescribed in the regulation, the expectation is still going to be there to ensure a safe and healthy workplace.
Okay, do we have any more questions from the attendees? All right, on behalf of Tie-ins and the Nova Scotia Tourism Human Resource Council, thank you to Joe and to all of you for attending session 1. Up next, join us for the second webinar of the Health and Safety Certificate Series. It's called Risk Management. Ensure your team has the skills and confidence to do their job safely through understanding how to assess risks and workplace hazards and implement controls using best practices. We urge that all attendees register for risk management. You can head on over to nstourismstrong.ca/health safety certificate, and I'll place that in the chat room box and also follow up via email if you want to head on over to that website and register for the next and remaining 3 sessions with Joe. Thanks all.
Thank you. Have a good day.